This is Truth Be Told.
That not only are there reptilians here,
new evidence of UFO fleets.
We were close to nuclear war.
To help you transform so that you can live your highest truth.
We're not being told just because we're not ready for it.
Radio stations of frequency, vibrational.
I was a homicide detective with LAPD.
UFOs increase. Visitations. The Exorcist. Amityville Horror. The Conjuring. Many of these movies we've seen scared us as children and as adults. And what do they have in common? Not just a ghost, but a possession, a demonic possession. Are they real? Well, today we're going to find out. Right before this Halloween season, we have psychiatrist Dr. Richard Gallagher, who is an expert on studying demonic possession and other diabolic attacks. The name of his new book, Demonic Foes. We're going to discover and explore some of his research over the years that might put chills up and down your spine. So grab the covers, get ready to throw them over your head. Listen to our guest. I'm Tony Sweet with Truth Be Told. Please welcome to the Truth Be Told studios for the first time, psychiatrist Dr. Richard Gallagher. Dr. Richard, how you doing?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Sweet. We're doing fine here in New York on a Friday night.
Well, I am honored to have you on the show to talk about your book, Demonic Foes. 25 years investigating as a psychiatrist of possessions and diabolic attacks. And that's right up our alley here on Truth Be Told. And with the Halloween season underway, you know, we've had psychics on and talked about ghosts and spirits and all kinds of different possessions. But you, as a psychiatrist, I'm very fascinated. First of all, how did a psychiatrist get interested in possessions from demonic spirits?
Well, I always tell people, Mr. Sweet, that I never really volunteered for this. You know, I mean, I'm a pretty mainstream psychiatrist.
Right.
So one day after my residency at Yale, I was working at a Cornell Medical College in New York, and this somewhat rumpled-looking priest knocked on my door. I sort of thought out of the blue, but he may have known that I am a Catholic. And he said, Dr. Gallagher, I know you're an academic psychiatrist, which I have remained. And he said, I'm wondering if you would be willing to evaluate cases for us that we think might have a demonic component. And I had come out of an era, which in some ways is not entirely over. I'd come out of an era where there was something called, you may be familiar with the term, there was something called the satanic panic. In other words, there were a lot of people in America, mostly, I'd say, fundamentalists, who were sort of seeing the devil everywhere,
right.
Thinking that, that Satanists were controlling all the workings of power in America. In some ways, that mentality has not entirely disappeared. And I said, well, look, Father, I'm a Catholic. I do believe in the devil. But, a lot of that stuff I'm very skeptical about. And he said to me with a smile, he said, well, then, Dr. Gallagher, you're the perfect man for the job. Because he wanted someone skeptical. In other words, he didn't want someone who went into this kind of seeing the devil everywhere. And then it kind of just developed after that. He and his colleague, who at the time were among the few Catholic exorcists in America, they asked me to see with them, since there were few exorcists, many cases across the country, Eventually, I was asked, by the Washington Post and other journals and television shows to talk about my experiences. I was eventually asked to write a book, part of which they're going to make into a movie. And so all this stuff that I've gotten involved in, including in an ongoing way, evaluating cases of possession and studying them as well at the same time as an academic, it just sort of happened. And I'd like to think it was a little more providential that way, you might say. I'd like to think that, by not volunteering, somehow this was meant to be. And I don't particularly recommend that people sort of be eager to get into this field.
Right.
I'm not sure that's a very healthy thing to do unless you're sort of knowledgeable and prepared about the subject.
Yeah, I find it fascinating that even the Catholic Church, when they do come in for an exorcism, and I find it fascinating how they determine if it is a possession or just mental illness. And how, as a psychologist, do you determine the two? Because, there's sometimes very similarities of just a mental illness versus a possession.
Keep in mind, I'm a psychiatrist, so I'm also a physician, not a psychologist.
Right,
but
right.
Look, it's a rigorous process. I mean, in many ways, that's why I wrote my book. Because it's a convoluted and controversial enough topic that I felt it needed, and I was asked to write a book, actually by many exorcists, sort of outlining, basic methods of distinguishing between mental illness and demonic attacks, of which the most dramatic is possession. But, the short answer to your question would be, you really have to have very strong evidence, I would say almost unequivocal evidence, that something is going on in the, we would call it in the preternatural realm. In other words, something beyond the natural world is occurring. And I'll explain what I mean in a minute. The modern world would probably call it paranormal, which is somewhat of a pseudoscientific term,
right,
for reasons that we can get into if you want. But you have to see very strong evidence that there is some kind of foreign spirit involved. Now, what is that? What are some of those pieces of evidence? Well, it's things like going into a trance. These would be examples. I give many, many examples, not only of cases, but of the different types of possessions.
Right.
They're all a little bit different from each other. But the gist of it would be that you have to see this preternatural activity by a foreign spirit that is impossible for a human being. So, for instance, the person may go into a trance and all of a sudden start, all of a sudden start speaking a foreign language and speaking it fluently that they never had any awareness of. Or, and again, I could give many examples. I was at a exorcism once. I've attended exorcisms. I'm not an exorcist, but as a scientific observer, where this woman was speaking a vaguely Slavic language, and none of us who were witnessing it, could figure out what was being said until after the exorcism session ended, and then the priest said to us, well, she was speaking Bulgarian, because I know that she doesn't know Bulgarian, but the demon does, and I'm from Bulgaria. So the demon was taunting me in Bulgarian language. That would be an example of a kind of thing that, you know, people can always come up with weird theories to try to explain, but, you know,
Right.
the obvious explanation to a lot of us is that we're dealing with some kind of entity that knows languages. Or another good example would be what's called in Latin, the demon will demonstrate knowledge of things that they would have no way, that the person would have no way of knowing. For instance, I dealt with a possessed Satanist once, and there are these rare Satanist people. And, you know, she could tell me how my mother died 20 years earlier of ovarian cancer. But she could do that with a lot of people. She could also see things at a distance. It's what the parapsychologists call remote viewing, I guess.
Right.
The lay term would be clairvoyance. And although I've never seen it myself, I've had very credible reports to me by about 35 different people of cases of levitation, especially during the exorcism, but not exclusively. So, you know, I often say to my colleagues, Mr. Sweet, you know, how many patients who are mentally ill do you know who can levitate, speak Bulgarian or Latin perfectly, know things like how people died or can see things at a distance? And yet, you know, all these things happen in possessions. And the evidence throughout history, we can get into that if you want. The evidence throughout history is quite impressive. I would even say massive. So even though possessions are rare, these are the kind of things that are reported. And they're not just reported in my book, which I give examples of these things, but they're reported by pretty much every experienced exorcist around the world. You know, I just got back from a meeting in Rome with about 300 worldwide exorcists, and they all have stories similar to exactly the examples I just gave.
Can I ask you this? I find that fascinating because there's a lot of people that you're saying it's a rare case. And I'm curious. There's a lot of people that do end up becoming possessed by demonic spirits. As a psychiatrist, what makes them different than anybody else to be so prone to, or being able to, their spirit, body, and soul accepting this demonic possession, where, you know, there's 8 billion people, but if it's so rare, what is your take on the people that do get possessed? Why them, I guess? Why these people? Have you thought about that or discussed that?
Well, having been involved in this field for 25 years, of course. And studied the question, including historically. And the general feeling, I mean, when I say these cases are rare, they are rare. I mean, they would probably be like a rare medical condition, you know, so maybe, you know, 10% of doctors may have seen a certain rare medical disorder and 90% would never have seen it. So even most priests probably never come across a true case of possession in their life.
Right.
There are other types of demonic attack that are a little more common, but we can get into that if you want.
Yeah, I'd love that.
But in terms of possession, on the one hand, they're rare. On the other hand, if you're really open to evidence, and there has to be, again, clear evidence, you realize that throughout history and all cultures, I mean, not just, some people say, oh, these possessions, they always happen in fundamentalist Christian communities or blah, blah, blah. As a matter of fact, they happen more often in pagan territories. They've been reported in pretty much all cultures. throughout history. So the overall evidence, in my opinion, historically, is massive in toto, but rare in any particular area. And look, are there reasons that somebody becomes possessed? Well, kind of course. It's not just all of a sudden going to happen to somebody out of the blue. People are surprised when I say something. I'm a very experienced psychiatrist. I have probably evaluated in the course of my career, which is not short, I've probably evaluated about 27,000 cases.
Wow.
These are patients.
Wow.
I'm talking about mental illness.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about possession.
Right.
I'm talking about 27,000 patients because I was a supervisor. I was a county emergency director in psychiatry, so I've seen a lot of patients in my life. And people are surprised when I say of those 27,000 patients, again, not cases of possession, who came to me because somebody suspected there was something more. None of those 27,000 people were possessed. So it doesn't just, happen to your average person, even to your average psychiatric patient. What occurs is that certain people, and again, you're talking to an academic, so I'm always making distinctions.
Right.
I'll try not to get pedantic about it, but there are voluntary possessions. There are some people who allow themselves to be possessed. I can give examples of that too. But most of the cases that come to, say, the church, and other religions too, most of those individuals are possessed. On the one hand, they're possessed involuntarily, but on the other hand, they have done something to invite a demon in. Now, how do you do that? Well, it's not an easy thing to do, but if you turn to serious occultism, some kind of black magic or Satanism or that sort of thing, and people are increasingly aware that there are these Satanists, even though
for sure,
not as many as the hysterical people think. Or if you have truly turned to something evil, if you've turned to bad evil in your life and or got involved in the occult, then you do open yourself up. In a sense, the catchphrase is you've opened a door. I would put it that you have invited or consented to some kind of involvement with evil spirits, wittingly or not. And that's a very dangerous thing to do. And those are the people who get possessed, by and large.
That's fascinating.
Is that clear? Is that clear what I'm saying?
You're very clear. And I think I was telling you before the show started that on Netflix there's a new documentary that came out, and I think it's called The Devil on Trial. And this was a true story about a kid, 10-year-old, getting possessed by the devil, and then his sister's boyfriend, after a while, pretty much willingly says, come take me and not the boy. And then all of a sudden the boy, 10-year-old boy, gets better. And within, I think, a week, the teenager ended up getting possessed and killing someone and did not remember doing it. And so, like they said, I think, I never can remember, the Warrens, the psychic and the demonic expert back in the day, said you should not have done that. You should have not willingly allowed the demon to take your possession of your body and soul. So yeah, you have to be careful. Like Ouija board. What do you think about Ouija boards and stuff like that? Do you feel that's an invitation to something that is darker that could open up possession?
Well, let me just comment on the first thing you said first.
Sure.
I knew Lorraine Warren.
Lorraine, there we go.
She was a very gracious person. I met her at a funeral of an exorcist, and she
Wow.
was, she was unquestionably experienced. I never met the husband, Ed, who apparently by that point had died.
Passed away.
In terms of the Netflix case, I mean, I'd have to see the facts. You got to remember,
Yeah,
Mr.
please.
Sweet, as you probably are aware, there sometimes is a great deal of exaggeration.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, Hollywood.
In my book, Demonic Foes, everything I write, with the exception of changing people's identity a little bit, I change people's names, even of the priest, even a priest that, quite frankly,
Right.
a lot of people who say in the Catholic Church they know who these guys are, but they're both deceased, so I don't use their names anymore.
Right.
So you have to be skeptical of some of these cases, which are truly, truly exaggerated or twisted for purposes of sensationalism or Hollywood. I did mention to you that, well, I guess I mentioned at the beginning of your interview that Hollywood is going to make a movie out of one of the major cases in my book. I tried to pick cases that were particularly interesting, and this was a woman who had a incredibly flamboyant, described even by the exorcists as a once-in-a-century case. So Blumhouse, Jason Blum, told me it was the hottest intellectual property he'd ever seen.
Wow.
Which, since he's a horror aficionado, that's sort of Hollywood speak for this is an amazingly true story. The second part of your question was sort of having to do with the Ouija boards. Look, I mean, I'm sure some naive teenagers, play around with Ouija boards, and I don't think it's a particularly savory thing to get involved in, but I'm sure that to them it's just a lark. But on a more serious level, the Ouija board was invented as, quote, a device for contacting spirits.
Right.
I mean, that is the whole point of it. So spiritualists, for instance, have used Ouija boards to contact spirits. And in some rare cases, people actually do contact spirits. And again, it's like going to a fortune teller. You'll ask a question. Questions are not necessarily answered accurately, but sometimes they do convey very remarkable knowledge. So yes, in that sense, that is the type of person who, if you take it very seriously and have these weird experiences, which people definitely can have with the Ouija board, I'm probably a minority, you are opening yourself up to the spirit world and the malign spiritual world, in my opinion. And when you do that, you are at risk. I mean, the point is, and Lorraine Warren would have certainly enunciated the same idea that I'm saying. When you play around with these spirits, they kind of feel it's sort of like getting involved with the mafia. People get involved with the mafia, they'll do the mafia a favor, the mafia does them a favor, and then they can't get rid of it because the mafia can blackmail them.
Yeah, once you're
it's
in,
sort of the same. These spirits, once they get their hooks in you, they kind of feel they're very legalistic, interestingly, and they somehow feel they have rights to you because, well, they gave you information, or, they gave you some kind of ability or power, and then they feel they own you. So it is all that sort of practices, and I would include things like tarot cards and other types of black magic. These are not not things to fool around with.
How long did it take you as a psychiatrist to really believe in the paranormal and demonic? As going in and as a psychiatrist and as a doctor, I'm sure just like a lot of skeptics in paranormal, they're like, I'll go into a ghost or a house that's haunted. Oh, okay, whatever. And they walk out and they still don't believe. But when there is that moment where something that was unexplained enough to go, you know what, I actually believe now. How long did it take you in your profession to actually believe that this existed?
Well, again, I mean, I'm not hiding the fact that I was brought up Catholic, so I
Right.
would read about cases of demonic possession in the Bible. I certainly thought it was always a possibility. I didn't really think I would come across them, and in fact, most psychiatrists never see such a case. But on the other hand, as I got more and more involved in the field, I mean, the case, which was relatively early on, it wasn't the first case I saw. But relatively early on, I saw this Satanist who had this incredibly extraordinary case. She did levitate during exorcisms, although I didn't see it. But I knew for a fact that she had all these psychic abilities. She kind of regarded herself as a witch. She definitely worshipped Satan, and
Wow.
she knew very well. And she would demonstrate them to me because she was kind of asked by the priest to see me, not because they had any questions that she was possessed, but because she was ambivalent about getting help. In many ways, she wanted to have her cake and eat it too. In other words, she wanted to be free of her possession. I mean, she was no dope, and she knew that this possession was upsetting her. And not exactly what she had wished for. But on the other hand, she refused to give up her practices, So, you can't have it both ways. People think, sometimes exorcism is this magic mumbo jumbo prayers, like a witch doctor or something. You say the right mumbo jumbo and the demon is gone. But in reality, the person has to work at it. They have to turn away from evil towards some kind of, spiritual development, or they're not going to get delivered. I mean, that's just the way it works. So, in answer to your question, again, I think when I saw that case and so many dramatic things happening with that case, that it really underscored for me, hey, this can be really, really dramatic.
Wow.
My introduction to her was actually quite annoying because my wife and I were in our bedroom, and all of a sudden we had two cats at the time. This is going on 25 years ago, and the cats just went berserk. And we were looking at each other. What the hell? What's going on? And, did they have too much catnip? Did they eat bad food? They really were trying to almost like kill each other. And these were reasonably well-behaved cats. Now, I had never met this woman before. Coincidentally, of course, it wasn't a coincidence, but the next morning, I get this doorbell ring in our hall. And I trudged down to open the door, and who's there but this priest that had introduced me to this field with this, relatively petite lady dressed kind of darkly with, makeup around her temples, black makeup. And the first thing, I've never met her before. Again, this is the possessed Satanist. And she says to me, "Nice to meet you, Dr. Gallagher. I've heard a lot about you. By the way, how did you like those cats last night?"
Oh, wow.
So, and there were other stories many other stories I could tell about her. Once she told me that she could see this this other exorcist at a distance. She described him to a T. She knew where he was. I called him up and I said, can you just tell me where you are? Father A, as he called himself. And she had described him to a T, even though he was 100 miles away. That's, again, what they call remote viewing.
Mm-hmm.
And she had no doubt that she had these abilities, which she boasted about, and she liked demonstrating. She had no doubt that she had these abilities because she was a Satanist. So I would say that case doesn't exactly answer your question, but I think what it really underscored for me is this is pretty serious stuff. I mean,
for sure,
these demons can affect my own house, my own cats, bizarrely. And
I was going to ask how you protected yourself going into any type of environment where there is a possession, that you protect yourself so they don't latch onto you.
Well, I don't think all of a sudden I'm going to get possessed, but there's no doubt that people involved in this field, it's one of the reasons I recommend that people not necessarily volunteer to get involved in this field. You have to protect yourself spiritually. And, look, I mean, I won't quote the Bible passages, but if you protect yourself spiritually, you're going to be somewhat protected. I mean, nobody's going to be 100% protected, but
right.
I haven't experienced anything all that dramatic over the years of a harmful nature.
I do have a question from the chat room. I'm not familiar with the interview, but I'm going to have to check it out. But Joel did say, Dr. Gallagher, what's your overall opinion on the Father Malachi Martin's Art Bell's interview? Have you checked that out? And what's your opinion on it?
I knew both of those gentlemen.
Oh, wow.
I knew, the name is pronounced Malachi Martin. He was this very erudite priest who had left the Jesuits. There was some controversy about that. There was also a little bit of controversy about his famous book, which some people thought took a little bit too much literary license. I'm not sure. I did meet him on a couple of times, and he was knowledgeable about the field. I don't think he was as experienced as an exorcist as he presented himself to be. That's my opinion. And then Art Bell, I know Art Bell knew of the work I did. I was certainly interviewed on that show that he had left by that time, but I'm not familiar with the particular interview that your audience member is discussing.
Definitely, I'll have to check it out too, because now I'm curious to see what the interview is about. So, but thank you for the question, Joel.
I don't want to seem like I criticized Father Martin, because he was kind of a delightful, impish guy, and I think he was extremely scholarly. But I think he may have oversold his stories a little bit. little enhanced. Well, you talked earlier about cases of 20-some thousand cases, not necessarily possessions, but clientele. Is that correct? Right. These were people that, in some professional category, I was defining as patients.
Right.
These demonically attacked people, and again, there's more than just possessions, but they are people who sort of independently find their way to my door, or most often a clergy will refer them to me. And it could be a clergy of any faith. So that's a different category. That second category of people, these are not patients of mine. I don't take these people as patients. I usually just evaluate them.
But how about we talk about how many cases of demonic possessions that you have witnessed, and then how did you choose these cases for your book? Was these cases that just happened to stand out the most? And was there any that you was almost too much that you didn't want to put in your book?
Well, there are some grisly stuff that some of these possessed individuals have done that I did not include in the book. But they all illustrate some point or other, either different types of possessions or different types of symptoms, or I contrasted,
right,
a guy who was a gangster was possessed, and he worked at it and, turned back to the church and got spiritual help, and he did very well. I contrasted him with, say, this Satanist woman who refused to leave the cult. So I did choose the examples because I thought they illustrated some important point about the field. I mean, that was sort of the whole point of writing the book, was to educate people about this field. And then what was your larger question?
No, it's one was like of the demonic possessions cases that you have witnessed, what really, the ones you've included in your book, what really stood out to why you included them?
Yeah, I mean, I chose them because I thought they illustrated particularly well some aspect of the field.
Right.
I mean, certainly I picked the example of the Satanists because that really was the most dramatic possession I've ever seen, even since. And even the priests themselves said, this is like a once in a century case, because
right.
she described herself as the high priestess of this cult. I mean, if you think about it, the demons would not want to let this woman go,
right?
Even though Faustian bargain. I think you were asking about how many cases have I seen.
Oh, yeah. How many cases, of demonic possessions have you?
There are different types of possessions. Now, there are people who are voluntarily possessed, which again is, talk about a Faustian bargain. They often get more than they bargain for.
Right.
I have seen, again, there were other types of demonic attack too. And, these more minor cases that we usually call, different people use different terms. We usually call in America oppressions. In other words, they're people who may be choked by some invisible force, or beaten up or something by some invisible force. We call those oppressions. Now, the total number of the possessions and oppressions I've seen has been, again, keep in mind, I've done this for almost 30 years, has been probably about 1,000. I would say that I've probably seen 200 cases of possession, which may be more than any, I would assume more than any physician in history. When I wrote my book, Demonic Foes, my academic chairman, who was also a Catholic and believed in this stuff, he said that I undoubtedly have seen more of these cases than any physician in the world. I think, given the fact that, some of these people contact me by telephone or Zoom, or,
right.
I've had people fly from over the world to come to my office. I think it is very probable that I've seen more of these cases than any physician in history, which again is one of the reasons I wrote the book.
So when you do find a patient that you feel is possessed, it's not like you personally can, well, maybe, but personally can, remove this demonic spirit. Do you then contact, the Catholic Church to investigate and help this individual? How does that, when do you determine that decision?
I mean, since their problem is a spiritual problem, not really a psychiatric problem.
Right.
I mean, some of these people understandably get depressed or something like that.
Right.
I may suggest they see a psychiatrist, but basically they need spiritual help. So the process is a little bit the opposite of what you're talking about, because usually they have talked to a priest or something, or a minister, or even a rabbi or an imam. They've already talked to the clergy,
Right.
and so they have somebody who's involved who may nevertheless be a little unclear what's going on. They want my opinion. So then I would refer them back for the spiritual help to the clergy member of their faith. Now, if they have no faith, if they have no clergy, in some sense they're more desperate because they don't know who to turn to.
Right.
Now, I do refer a fair amount of people to Catholic clergy who tend to be among the most experienced and organized of this whole group of people involved in helping people with exorcisms. But again, that's not my job as a physician
Right.
to directly give the spiritual help.
So, but I know a lot of people that even in like the ufology world, when they get abducted, it makes such a huge impact on their life. And when they do, the abduction is over. And so we're going to switch it back over to the possession has been removed. The psychological part of the mental state must be really impacted. How does one, start restoring their mental state back to normal, or do they ever after a possession?
Are you equating alien abductions with possession? Because alien abductions is a whole nother.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying is after an abduction or after possession, it has really impacted the spirituality and mental state of the person, because that's a traumatic experience, both of them. So, but as a possession, separate from the alien abduction, what are people like after the possession? How long does it take them to get, I guess, back to normal? Because I'm sure they're scared it's going to happen again. They're yeah. So what?
Look, I mean, you could say anybody who's opened themselves up to the demonic is not 100%
Right.
healthy.
Right.
On the other hand, a lot of these victims, and I call them victims, whatever role they played in it, they often feel very good after they're exorcised. Not everyone needs all that much ongoing help. But again, these are good questions that have complicated answers. There's certainly people who are sort of traumatized. They may need some ongoing, psychological help. They
Right.
certainly need to keep up their spiritual life, which is the key to their getting better and remaining better. So it really varies, Mr. Sweet, from person to person. It's just that I may hear about these people. Some of these people I become very important to as someone who have advised them sensibly. On the other hand, I only very rarely get involved in treating these individuals. Maybe if they're depressed or
Right.
dealing with, trauma and all that, I may stay involved with them to some extent. But by and large, that's the exception that proves the rule. There's only 24 hours in a day.
You're right. That is true.
So, I can only treat a certain amount of patients, and I'm a very busy psychiatrist.
That's great. And I'm glad you're there to help these people. We do have another question from the chat room. It says, can the doctor speak about rational possession? Do you know?
That's a whole convoluted subject. I mean, there's a debate about that, how often that occurs. I'll give an example of a woman I evaluated whose family insisted to me that there was something generational about her possession. And when I spoke to her privately, she said, well, that's what my parents believe. What I believe is that I've been messing around with the occult world for the last 10 years. I'd rather have my parents believe this was generational. I'm not saying I dismiss all theories about that, but it's a debate. Different people, intelligent people, have different ideas about that. I try to stick in my book to things I know about rather than get into some of this debatable, more esoteric controversies.
Before we get out of here, I can't believe, we're going fast and the time is just flying by, but do you notice that a lot of the possessions are in certain parts of the world more than others? Maybe like Europe, since there's a lot more older structures, a lot more history, or do you find that, here in America, it's, battlegrounds? I know that's more, just normal ghost, but where do you see it happening more? Or is there?
Well, again, it's a complicated question, good question. Probably is another debatable subject. I would say that strangely, countries, areas that are very pagan still, and so have a lot of, people like witch doctors and black magic, or a country which accepts a lot of black magic, like voodoo, like Haiti or something.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, these are often areas where you see more of these cases than, say, in the modern Western world. I have a good friend who's a biblical scholar, and he says, in Africa, this stuff is very common, much more common than, say, in the United States. And he says the Western world has a lot to learn from Africa about evil spirits. And I think there's truth to that. As the Western world has become less mainstream religious, less Christian, you probably see more of this stuff in these countries too, because people are coming to alternate occult beliefs and practices. Right. Although I still don't think it's to the level that it is in some of these, old pagan countries. Something that was interesting to me is there's a lively belief in evil spirits in many areas of the world, including Asia, including Japan. So my book has been translated into several languages. Wow. And I was a little surprised that the Japanese wanted to translate it into Japanese.
That's
because
great.
There's a very active belief in evil spirits. Now, it's not a particularly Christian culture, so they have different views about evil spirits, but they certainly are aware that, as have been most people in history, they are aware that evil spirits exist. I would say when people sometimes say to me, Dr. Gallagher, as a psychiatrist, do you feel you're out of the mainstream? And I said, well, it really depends on what mainstream you're talking about. Now, most psychiatrists are very aware that there are psychotic patients who imagine or are delusional about or hear voices that they claim are demons that all of us regard as mental illness. So a lot of psychiatrists, certainly probably in America and in Europe, with many exceptions, many of whom I know psychiatrists all over the world who believe exactly the way I do. So even within the field, it's not quite as unusual a belief as many people would assume. But psychiatrists are, as a rule, also tend to be very committed to a certain type of science, and which on its own level is very, very helpful. I mean, I regard myself as a scientist, having a scientific mentality. But you have to be open to things that, can't be subject to experimentation, but are
Right.
more historical in nature. But if you talk about mainstream, I mean, most Americans believe in evil spirits.
Mm-hmm.
And they not only believe in evil spirits, according to most surveys, they believe that spirits can overtly attack people. So I'm certainly not out of the mainstream in America. I would say around the world, with the possible exception of certain European countries, which are pretty strong believers in materialism, most people around the world believe in evil spirits. And if you look at history, belief in evil spirits is almost ubiquitous in history. So, I sometimes say to people, what mainstream are you talking about? I do not feel, if you look at the larger view of the world and world history, I do not believe I am, quote, out of the mainstream. I believe that people who don't believe in evil spirits in some ways are out of the mainstream.
What thing just popped into my head is we always talk about Catholic Church priest doing the exorcism. I mean, The Exorcist itself, the movie, and every time, in fact, the documentary I was telling you about Netflix, they call the local priest. Why is it Catholic priest, not, I'm just throwing it out there, like a Buddhist monk, or why is it a Catholic? What is it about Catholic priests or seem to be the only one, or can other people actually remove a demonic possession from a person? And is it just Christianity that can remove it?
I mean, again, I'll give you a complicated academic answer.
Okay.
Number one, people in all religious traditions have reported possessions. Now, they may have different beliefs about it than we do. In the Christian world, in earlier Judaism, not so much in modern Judaism, but certainly in the Muslim religion too, we believe demons are fallen angels.
Mm-hmm.
Now, why do we believe that? Well, in an exorcism, in a successful exorcism, demons are forced to admit who they are. So for a long time, I mean, demons invariably lie, and they may say, well, I'm a deceased soul.
Right.
Or, what the Jewish tradition, folk tradition called Dibbicks, or I'm Judas Iscariot, or believe it or not, I've had people say I'm Zeus or I'm Apollo, and demons pretend they're all kinds of different things. They invariably lie. They're very sadistic, which is part of the reason why this happens in the first place. Basically, they hate God, and they can't attack God, so they attack God.
They got to take it out on the children.
So I would say, on the one hand, almost all religious traditions have attempted to drive out spirits. I mean, sometimes I think some of them have some success. I do think that the Catholic Church, as well as the Eastern Orthodox, but even more so the Catholic Church, have had the most success. Now, I'm sure some of your Protestant audience would probably disagree with that. But they tend to be a little more organized, a little more ritualized, in a good way.
Mm-hmm.
And they tend to have like a little more experience. Now, if you're really going to get into the theology, the Catholics would maintain that, as well as non-Catholic Christians, of course, would maintain that all possessions, whether the person is aware of it or not, are ultimately delivered by our Lord.
Right.
They would maintain that. And what Catholics tend to believe, as well as the Eastern Orthodox, so, you're talking about the majority of Christians in the world. They believe that Jesus gave the authority, and there's pretty good evidence in the Bible, although again, nothing in the Bible is not debated by people. So I'm not saying all people believe exactly what I'm going to say, but they would believe that Jesus gave the authority to drive out spirits to the church, and through this concept of apostolic succession, that the churches that have held on to apostolic succession,
right,
especially Eastern Orthodox and Catholics, have more of a power to drive out spirits. Now that sounds kind of chauvinistic on the part of Catholics, but I do feel, because I've dealt with people in other religions too, that in my experience, the Catholics and the Eastern Orthodox have a little more successes. But I'm sure some people in your audience would probably dispute that.
And that's good. That's all right. And but one thing I'm excited about is you said there's a potential movie going to be made. So do you know much about when that's going to be in production and any release dates thrown out there yet for a year or two?
Well, the early planning for that, some in your audience may know Jason Blum. He does a lot of horror movies, and he's done the most recent Exorcist movies. He did Paranormal Activity movies, which he sort of made his bones in Hollywood by doing that. He had contacted me and said, "Rich, this story about the Satanists you told is terrific, and we'd like to make a movie of it." Anyway, so we agreed to make a movie. I would be executive producer, and of course he would be the owner
right,
and producer of the movie. And I was delighted when he hired a very top Hollywood director named Tom McCarthy, whose movie Spotlight won the Academy Award about the Boston abusive priest crisis, and very fine movie in my opinion. He did the movie Stillwater with Matt Damon.
That's great.
And so he's on board. The planning is on board, and I would hope within a couple of years, because these things take a while.
They do take time.
That they'd have a finished product,
And with the strike going on right now, that's a little hesitation on things. Well, I know people.
The writer strike is over.
Yeah, writer strike's over. Actors are still. In fact, a block away is Warner Brothers. So
the planning is going on, but it's slow motion. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, people I know want to find out more about you and your research and books and everything. So, where can people find you? Where can they go?
I mean, there are tapes and podcasts all over the internet. I mean, I know on YouTube you can easily find interviews I've had. The easiest way to really learn about my research, a little bit about my background, is the book Demonic Foes, my 25 years as a psychiatrist investigating possessions, diabolic, docs, and the paranormal. And that's easily available. I mean, easiest way is through the HarperCollins website. And I'm grateful to HarperCollins that they allowed me to write a serious book that is described as pretty enthralling at the same time. Or you can get it easily on Amazon. So, again, it's not hard to find.
No, it's not. But I could tell everybody that writes books, I appreciate you for doing the research for the people like myself that don't. I do some of my own on certain things, but mostly get my information from people like you that have put 25 years of experience into this field, and we all appreciate you doing it and sharing your stories and your cases with us, and hopefully you'll come back, and hopefully next time we'll be talking about your movie.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you for mentioning the book and the movie.
Of course.
I'm not a particularly materialistic person, but I like to get the message out.
Well, thank you. And everybody, please look up Dr. Richard Gallagher. Go find the book, Demonic Foes, my 25 years as a psychiatrist investigating possessions, by diabolic attacks, and the paranormal. Amazon and pretty much anywhere else you can find a book like this. It's a great book, and I want you guys to pick it up and support our amazing guests today. So, Dr. Gallagher, thank you, and please come back. I really would love to have you back.
Thank you. You're welcome, and thank you for the invitation to come back at some point.
You got it. You got it. And thank you, everybody, for the questions you had and the comments that you've been talking about in our chat room today. We really appreciate you. Again, without you, we wouldn't be doing this for this many years, and we appreciate you. You can watch Minuteman Report on Monday with Robert Hensley, Bonnie Burkard doing the Truth Be Told transformation, more of the spiritual side of what I do, and then, of course, me every Friday at 3 o'clock with amazing guests, authors, researchers, TV hosts, and stars. So talking all things paranormal. We are part of the Club Paranormal, and we hope you join us, and by subscribing, leaving comments, sharing the shows. And so until next time, I'm Tony Sweet with Truth Be Told. Take care, guys. This has been another episode of Truth Be Told. Thank you so much for watching. Recorded live at UBN Go Studios in Burbank, California. Join us on social media. Facebook, Truth Be Told Radio. Instagram, Truth Be Told Paranormal. Go to Truth Be Told Worldwide for more information on upcoming shows.